Sorry, guys.
You're just making my anxiety higher.
It could be good practice to deal with it.
Would be bloopers. Is it on right now?
I think it is. Alright, I think we're good. February 21st, CEU, Timothy Center, Molly Collins, DBT. Alright, go for it.
I just get started.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry, I put animation in here. Not really, just like slides. Alrighty. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're really just Josh and Tori. So today we're just gonna go through briefly what is DBT, because I think we all have probably some idea of what it is through graduate school and some small training. But we're gonna go through what is DBT, maybe some theories that DBT utilizes, because I think it's easy to see DBT as just skills based. So I wanted to talk about some of the theories that DBT also takes from that our clinicians might operate out of. So we'll talk about that. Some of the underlinings of the theory, and then we're going to go over our wise mind skill, and then how can we potentially use wise mind with our different populations. And so we'll cover how could you use wise mind with families, couples, and then kids. And so leaving out teens, because we can talk about teens and we have a lot of teen resources, and so that's why I wanted to hit on kind of the three different categories. So we will just start with what is DBT. So DBT is dialectical behavior therapy. So I think the main question, at least with parents a lot, is what even is a dialectic? And so a dialectic is the synthesis of opposites. So the way that we like to talk about it with parents and teens are just two things that you think can't be true at the same time. So how can something be both right and wrong? Or how could two people be right at the same time? And so if we have opposites, we're going to fall in this black or white. But as we know, life is usually in the gray. And so the dialectic helps us go, let's think what is black and what is white, and then let's put it together and live in the gray. So the synthesis. So the major dialectic within DBT is acceptance and change. We cannot change what we haven't accepted. And so, ooh, that sneeze baby. Sorry, I was sneezing. We cannot change what we haven't accepted. And so in order to do any of these changing, we have to accept, and the core assumption of acceptance within DBT is that clients are doing their best, and the change part is that they can do better. You'll probably get a lot of pushback on this one, because how is it that my teen, my spouse, the family is doing the very best that they can do, yet at the same time they can also do better? So that is the core assumption, kind of the fundamental dialectic within DBT. And so going back to validating, you're doing your best, and also we can be doing better. This also applies to therapists. You are doing your best, and you can also do better. Also, DBT is directive, and it's going to be change oriented. And so we'll talk about kind of where these theories utilize like directive and change orientations, but we have skills. We are telling you you can do better. We're being direct and helping you go, what is it that maybe we need to be doing better on? And if our core dialectic is about change, we're going to be looking for change orientation. And so it's not, this part of it is not person-centered, to where you're leading the client, or they're leading themselves. You're going to be leading the client help change. And so DBT also has probably the biggest emphasis on validation. And so we'll get into more the theory and why validation is so important in DBT, or in validation, but DBT has a really large emphasis on validation. And so that goes back to, hey, you're doing the best that you can do, and I get that. So they would say if a client is resisting or not showing the progress you want, go back to validation and always fall back on validation. And then lastly, DBT, and we'll get validation and motion-based together later, but DBT is different than CBT in that it's going to be emotion-based as opposed to cognitively based. And so this is where that validation piece comes in. So a lot of the train of thought in DBT is your emotions are going to affect your behaviors, and that's kind of where it stems from, as opposed to CBT with our cognitions. And so some of the other theories that DBT is going to utilize that I really want to talk about, because I know we are not all DBT therapists, but CBT. So DBT is essentially the stepchild, if you will, of CBT. So there's a lot of that change orientation. There is a lot of thought bases within DBT and diary cards. And so when you think of CBT, think of the branch down, the like baby being DBT. So there's a lot of cognition, but we're going to focus on the emotion and then the cognition, as opposed to CBT starting with the cognition. DBT is pretty human-centered. So it also would say that the therapeutic alliance is the most important, the foremost agent of change. And so Rogerian and human-centered therapies play this role, as well as unconditional acceptance. So going back to, again, that beginning dialectic of accepting. So not only are you accepting of the client, but the client has to accept what's going on in their life. And so we unconditionally accept our clients, and DBT would say DBT cannot fail the client, or the client can't fail DBT. So really, you as the therapist could fail DBT. DBT could not fail you, and that's that unconditional acceptance. A lot of behaviorism is going to be within DBT, and so a lot of contingency management, and so a lot of behavior contracts, similar to like what Jimmy does with ODD kids, but also just behavior contracts in the if-then relationship. Like, if you continue doing blank, and we've talked about it, and you're accepting that this is what you're doing, you can then change, and that would be the then part of the relationship. And so that's why we have guidelines. That's what we stick to, our strict guidelines and our boundaries. And we can show, like, you're behaving X, Y, and Z. And so a lot of contingency management within DBT. There are some psychodynamic elements. There is definitely levels of self-awareness that you kind of have to have. Because a lot of acceptance would require you're self-aware. And so if you're leaning more towards that, like, psychodynamic OR kind of realm, DBT has some self-awareness for you. And so you gotta be self-aware, and that's part of interpersonal relationships, and being mindful to be self-aware. And so we'll talk more about mindfulness later too. And then lastly, there are also some Gestalt techniques, a lot of like tension and conflict, and that would be the synthesis of the here and now. And so mindfulness is being present, and it's being aware, and it's being in the here and now. And so there's a lot of like in the moment, in vivo. If you're doing this right here in the room, you're probably doing this outside of the room. And so we're going to do something in vivo, and that might be behavioral, that might be self-awareness, kind of any of these things. So there are more. These are just like kind of the ones I hit on, because I think they kind of cover a lot of the different realms of the different theories that we know. Questions from the live audience?
We actually are live. Did I tell you that? That's how I figured out how to do it. I couldn't do it the other way. This is all over the place. We'll get it down.
Okay. We're going to pop into the 5 essential functions of DBT and my sell as to why you should use it. Okay. So one of the 5 functions is going to be a motivation for change, and that's going back to that acceptance and change dialectic. And so, like, if we're hopeless and we have no success in life or we're stuck, how do we get things to change? And I think we probably as clinicians all struggle with finding motivation for our clients and our clients finding motivation. And so our job is going to be to remoralize and connect them with hope. And so if you practice skills, good things are going to happen for you. And so getting them motivated for accepting what's going on and then having like practical skills to change what's going on in life. And so that's where DBT falls for that motivation for change. We're going to enhance clients' capabilities. And so essentially these are tools to make things happen. So these are the skills, whether they're being mindful or calming themselves down when they are, worked up or overwhelmed, or in relationships with people. The skills help us change and give them more of a repertoire to go outside of our office and actually be able to use them. So we want something for them to have and use and be able to do it. One of the other essential functions is going to be generalizing what we teach clients, and so those skills. So we can talk about these skills in theory in the room, but let's generalize to where do you need these skills? Do you need them at school? Do you need them at work? At home? Where are you to utilize these skills? And so one of the important things is that these skills can travel with the client. And so where they need to go, the skills can follow them. Another essential function of DBT is increasing the therapist motivation and skill set. When we're doing better, our clients are going to be doing better. That's where DBT comes from that. And we want to seek out our colleagues. And a really huge component of DBT is consultation and knowing that the therapist has not arrived and perfected their craft, but they're continually seeking validation for themselves and accepting that maybe there's work that they can change with. And so if we're doing and implementing skills in our lives, it's going to help our motivation to be like, actually this works, and I can teach you these skills because I know they work and I can prove it to you. And so it's increasing our motivation. And lastly, if you're having any clients or populations that need structure, DBT is going to be really, really good for that because it makes everything predictable. As I think everyone knows, with DBT kind of coming from the cognitive side of, if DBT stems from the cognitive side, the clients that Marshall and Han used to be like working with when the borderline population were not validated enough, and that's where DBT comes with that emotion base. And so like having them have that structure with the emotion and the cognition and making things predictable is super helpful in this theory, and really important with DBT to have structure and boundaries and making things predictable. Okay, if we don't have any questions from our live audience, we're going to move into the biosocial model, which is probably like the theory and the crux of why DBT stems from the emotion-based portion, or emotion versus cognition. And so with the biosocial model, DBT assumes that clients are suffering from emotional vulnerability or dysregulation, which would be the biology or the nature component, and then they are in an invalidating environment, which is the social or nurturing component. And so, if we have a client who's emotionally vulnerable or dysregulated, and then we put them in an invalidating environment, so whether that's home life, school, whatever, and we are invalidating their emotions, and they naturally probably have more like an emotional temperament, then that's going to create explosion and chaos, and that's where you're going to see dysregulation and kind of like the roller coaster with these clients. So DBT also has this idea of the kindling effect. So with an emotional baseline that it's already elevated from this invalidating environment, we are ready to be ignited really quickly because it's already like hyper aroused and hyperactive. And so if you think about it as like when you go camping and the coals are already hot, you don't put water on them when you're sleeping at night, you just let them die down, but they're still warm, so in the morning you can light your fire quickly. That's what's happening with these clients. So they're already hot, so then when their baseline's already up, when a prompting event or an invalidating environment happens, they're already warm and hyper aroused and ready to spike. And so that's where you're going to see that consistent emotional deregulation or dysregulation and reactivity. So DBT is going to take the assumption that clients are innately emotionally hypersensitive or vulnerable. Then when in invalidating environments become reactive and not responsive. So a response has to be mindful and there's a choice in that, and a reaction doesn't really have a choice. It's more guttural. And so reiterating, the response is invalidated again, creating this cycle of emotional dysregulation, volatility, and invalidation. So we keep this cycle going because our clients are super emotional, they react, we invalidate the way that they've reacted, and they keep going. And so it's this pattern. Then going back to what we first talked about, like kind of one of the four, like the key components of DBT is that validation is the primary intervention. And so if we're saying they're already emotionally vulnerable, and that's okay, their temperament might just be more emotional. If we're invalidating them to cause this reactivity, validation is going to be the primary intervention. So like DBT would say, come back every time your client is dysregulated, emotional, back to validating, more than like a safety issue. So I can go back to that video. You're here. I'll let you go. So we'll move into the 4 core modules of DBT, and I'm talking about them in the order that we do them in the IOP. And so it's pretty the way that I think Lane Peterson would do, who's deviated from Marsha Linehan, and so we kind of follow him more than Marsha. Marsha.
Heyo. That was a good Brady Bunch reference.
So we'll start with mindfulness. Mindfulness is, if just breaking it down super simplistically, talking to clients or parents or whoever you're talking to mindfulness, is saying it's not this, like, I think we have this a lot with Christian clients, that mindfulness is like Eastern medicine or this Eastern theory, when really it's just paying attention right now in the present moment without judgment. And so the key components of mindfulness is that we're not judging our thoughts or what's happening in the present moment, and we're just accepting that this is what is happening in the present moment. So when we're able to be mindful and be present intentionally, we're going to reduce amplifying emotions, and we're going to reduce the escape and avoidance of emotions. My DBT would say you cannot use or do any of these skills in distress tolerance, in emotional regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness if you are not mindful. And so you have to understand and be mindful in order to use any of these other skills. And so the way that we talk about it in mindfulness is not dwelling on the past or fearing the future, but it's just focusing on right now. So if I can accept what's going on right now in the present moment, I actually have the ability to change what's going on. I can't change the future if I'm living in the future. I'm missing the time period to affect any change. So mindfulness is kind of the crux of the ability to use any skill after that. Then once we have mindfulness, we get into distress tolerance, which broken down is just healthy ways of coping with emotions. Because if we're saying we're emotion based and suddenly we're out of control and we've hit our breaking point, our emotions have taken over, we're in, the reptile brain, fight or flight, and so we cannot use cognition. So distress tolerance is going to desire to help us not make the situation worse, because if we're emotional and we're acting on it, it's probably going to make it worse. And so, but help us cope effectively with just those distressing events. And so a lot of distress tolerance skills are physical, to bring our bodies back down and be able to utilize both the emotional and cognitive sides of our brains. Because otherwise, when we're in distress, we're only utilizing that emotional side. So once we've used our distress tolerance skills and we're out of that module, we can move into actually regulating our emotions. And so the whole point of the emotion regulation module is for regulation and like true experiencing of our emotions without chaos or exploding this roller coaster. We're actually experiencing our emotions. And so emotion regulation will help us reduce vulnerability to intense emotions, and it's going to increase opportunities for positive emotions. Positive, I like talking about it by saying unpleasant or pleasant emotions, because then I think positive and negative makes it sound there are good emotions and bad emotions. And if we're being non-judgmental, we don't want to say negative, but it's easy to know. So maybe more, I just was copying this from Lane, that's why it says positive. Lastly, emotion regulation is going to help your client get out of mood congruent behaviors. And so what that means is I'm sad because I got in a fight with my parents and now I'm going to lay in bed all day long, and then I'm going to put on the saddest artist that I know in my sad playlist. Probably not going to feel better at the end of the day. I'm probably actually going to continue to feel sad. And so what emotion regulation will help us do is get out of these mood congruent behaviors that we do. And so instead of listening to sad music, I'm going to put on a happy playlist. I'm going to do the opposite.
Can you turn on that light? There's a glare on the TV. On the video.
Oh, there. Is the web audience?
It's better, but it's free. We'll just send your presentation out with this. With the video.
Lastly, we have interpersonal effectiveness, which just social skills. That's the easiest way to talk about that. But if we're like breaking it down, interpersonal is inside the way that I like am interacting versus intra being a person-to-person relationship. So it's more internal. So interpersonal effectiveness is going to help us maintain relationships while it's going to help maintain relationships, maintain our self-respect while simultaneously getting our needs met. And so that's kind of our interpersonal triangle that we talk about. So those are kind of the three components. So relationships, self-respect, and boundaries, and getting our objectives met and our needs met. And so we'll go more. No, we're not going more into that today. So those are the 4 main modules that DBT walks out of. So, populations that might benefit from DBT, and some populations that don't benefit, because it won't work. Any higher risk factors. So, any client who is dealing with any suicidal ideation.
Can you go back for a second? You see it kind of as a funnel, like someone has to start at. Go back one more. Nope. There we go. Someone has to, first of all, pay attention, then figure out their emotions to be able to have interpersonal skills. They kind of the skills build on each other.
Not necessarily. Like, think of mindfulness as like the theory or like the cloud that's floating overhead, but you don't have to have like XYZ skills in order to be able to do them. You just kind of have to have the idea of like being present. And we'll talk about funneling clients. That's in another slide. Like the treatment hierarchy.
And can I ask, when you said, what was the other word you said for negative? Because I was writing it. That?
I like one of the videos that we watched, pleasant versus unpleasant. Because if we're taking a non-judgmental stance, if I'm evaluating as positive or negative, that's already a judgment. And so we have a lot more pleasant emotions than we do unpleasant. Switch that. We have a lot more unpleasant emotions than we do pleasant. It's like shame, guilt, fear, anger, and then you're like happiness, joy. So don't get tied up in the nitty-gritties of it. But if you're like standard DBT, you're probably saying everything non-judgmentally. So populations that would benefit any high risk factor. So suicidal ideation, SIB, that's what DBT calls self-harm. So that would include like more than cutting. I think we think self-harm to be cutting, but SIB would include in that and some. And so any intentional behavior to harm self would be considered SIB in DBT's theory, or DBT's mind frame. Frame of mind. Oh, good Lord. Depressive disorders, any mood dysregulation disorders would be really good. Any borderline personality or just symptomology. So I think if you have a client who you would not diagnose with borderline personality disorder, or they're just too young but you have a hunch, DBT is going to be really good. Bipolar disorders, any generalized anxiety and social phobias. Exclusions to that would be like true social anxiety disorder, because it's usually done in a group setting, and so that could be once we like have the social anxiety handled, then they can come into DBT. If it's not primary, we can do substance use, we can do eating disorders. There is like DBT for substance use as well, and so if that's something you're interested in, there's like kind of a track for that, and I think there's sort of a track for eating disorders, but I've also seen DBT for intellectual disabilities. So, and then there's like DBT for super rigid clients, and so if your client is probably more OCD, something more controlling, which would probably fall in that eating disorder realm, I think it's called radically open DBT, which we don't do, but it's out there if you want information on that.
Where do you feel like ours, as far as the symptomology, falls in? If it can kind of be tailored to most anything.
Yeah. Well, so like I think it's like mood dysregulation and depressive.
Which is what we see the most, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because we'll get to on the same page like the exclusions and their like personality disorders, like antisocial. So any more complex presentations, like the more complex that's going on, the more complexity there is, probably more boundary treatment there needs to be, and so DBT could be beneficial. If they need to do EMDR or like some deeper trauma work, DBT can be a good primer to provide those coping skills. And so if you like have a client you want to send to Vanessa or Kristen, that could be like the IOP could be super helpful to get them just like a base layer of coping before we step into trauma work. Or if you're just having trouble with impulsivity, any just like emotion regulation, you're not necessarily have a mood dysregulation disorder, but emotion regulation is difficult for you. Or any client who needs help with interpersonal relationships, particularly preteens. It's true. And then any client who just needs a balance of life. And that would be that dialectic. So, I mean, like, we're really living in, like, black or white, like you're seeing a lot of cognitive distortions, DBT can be helpful to have that balance. So, exclusions for DBT would include narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and odds are they're not coming in here and we're going to refer them out probably at the severity of like maybe antisocial. You know, so if they're like bordering conduct disorder, probably not DBT. They're not going to self-elect.
They're hanging cats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably not like a narcissist isn't going to like truly walk in and be like, I need help. So you'd have to like really monitor that in the group scenario too.
But we could work with psychosis if it was medicated.
Yes. So active psychotic disorders. I forget. I wrote it down, what it's called. There's something in psychotic disorder, like intellectual, I don't know. Not active psychosis, and then social anxiety. Like true social anxiety would not benefit until it's like handled and a little more under control. So, cats.
Jimmy's not here, so I gotta.
Yeah, you gotta fill it. Okay. So the next slide's gonna bounce off like maybe our higher risk factors. And so DBT has a treatment hierarchy, and I think this is when people get into like DBT is skills based, and you don't get into like the nitty gritty interpersonal identity stuff, which isn't true. But DBT would say, I can't talk to you about your core beliefs of what your dad, yelled at you as a kid and formed your identity. If we talk about that, and then you immediately go self-harm. Like DBT is going to say, and there's a treatment hierarchy, and so we're going to go through, if you're unsure if DBT would be beneficial, you can, we'll go through like these 4 things. So, 1, again, any suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, and any intense SI urges. So this would really categorize, is the person at risk of acting on these? Like I'll say I have some clients who self-harm, but it's not intense, they can't really control it kind of scenarios. And so we do DBT skills in session, but it doesn't always warrant, hey, you need a 9-hour IOP. But DBT could be helpful. 2, sorry, we're going to SOB now. Those self-injurious behaviors and having intense urges. So is the person at risk of like continually acting on these? Probably. Side note, like Elaine Peterson, who goes off of Marshall Linehan. So Linehan's standard, really strict. You don't break from DBT. It's not eclectic at all. Lane would say it can be eclectic, and so that's a model we follow. But if you're like, oh my gosh, this person can't survive without me, you probably need to send them into a higher level care. So if you have any urgency of like my client won't make it without any intervention of my help, that's a sign in the treatment hierarchy that you need to get more help.
Like a higher level?
Yeah.
Or a more pure DBT?
Higher level. Yeah. Because, well, I know, but like based on his studies, there hasn't been necessarily like any research to prove the efficacy of strict standard DBT. It's still like the therapeutic alliance, and so it's not. There's like no research to show deviating from the standard is less effective or more effective. It's still about the therapeutic alliance. Side note. If your client has any treatment interfering behaviors, which DBT calls TIB, and so that would be coming in late, like not attending sessions intentionally, other than I was in a car wreck or something, continual rescheduling, if they talk about their problems but they're not using skills or they're not doing what you're talking about in session, potentially coming under the influence, any parent interfering behaviors, things like that would warrant like a thought for DBT to have some structure and some boundaries. So you're coming in late, it's okay, but I'm still ending my session on time. And if this continues to be a thing, we're going to talk about it, and this is where that contingency management would come in, and we're going to make a plan to go, okay, if you keep coming in, you know what the consequence is, and that's I'm going to terminate you and refer. So it's just pretty boundary. But that would be an interfering behavior. DBT would like immediately address. Then we just kind of get to quality of life. So it's like normal functioning, and kind of intense conflict, like threats of losing your house, unemployment, these kind of things. So that, like DBT would see that as obviously intense stressor, but it would not be as much of a stressor as probably like intense suicidal urges. So if you're seeing any clients within hierarchy 1 and 2, DBT would probably be a good course of action. Thoughts or questions there? I'm still going to do.
I mean, that's like a mixture of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of really any good therapy that has boundaries with their clients. All that just makes sense.
But like if you're like a social worker, you're probably looking at number 4 and being like, well, they don't have a home, so what are we gonna do?
Right.
It's true.
First.
Yeah. So it could be your orientation, and I think that's why some people are like, well, but like DBT gets to just the skills. Yeah, but DBT is gonna see that as like top treatment if you're having SI.
Yep.
Like, but you don't get to the nitty gritty of the person.
Yep.
Fair, but the nitty gritty causes them to want to, in their life, they don't care about the nitty gritty like intensia.
Yep.
So, yeah, like Lane will say, DBT isn't anything new. It's just a new culmination of
It's a way
everything
to
under the sun. Already.
codify it.
Yep.
Yep.
Do I still need to be on it new?
Yes.
Since we started. Okay. Yes. So, we're going to run through behavioral analysis or the DBT diary card. So this is...
I say that, but obviously those watching this and hearing my voice right now that are not here are just going to have like an hour-long experience, no matter the time.
Gotcha. I shouldn't remember when we started.
If you need to leave at noon, if Tori, you need to leave at noon, check out, but also you go just up till 60 minutes if you want, you can.
I should remember when we started.
We probably started 10 after.
Okay, so this is our, wait a second, well, you're not going to see it. Our diary card that we use, it's located in the admin room, but they're also online in the IOP Google Drive, so we can share that with you guys. But this is where a lot of the behaviorism and contingency management can come in. But this is DBT's way of tracking emotions. So this is a model for describing emotions / behavioral analysis. So DBT is going to say, we'll come back to the vulnerabilities part, but there's a prompting event. Something happened and it prompted that primary emotion in me. Oops, those are wrong. Switch primary and secondary emotions on this thing, but DBT is going to say there was a prompting event that prompted some emotion in me, and like CB2 would say there's something that prompted my thoughts. And so there's a primary emotion, like my true core feeling, then my secondary emotion that I'm displaying, and then I have all the self-talk with it. And so I came home and my spouse didn't take out the trash. And my primary emotion is like, I am hurt because really I feel disrespected and you didn't care. But my secondary emotion is I'm mad at you. And my talk is like, you're an idiot. I asked you to do one thing. You don't even care. No one listens to me. Those are, your self-talk and the thoughts that we have. So this is when we get to our action urge and our actual action. And so sometimes we have an urge to yell, scream, for some clients, it's self-harm, use a substance. There's also a difference between actually acting on that. And so they want to differentiate, do you have the urge to do it, and also did you act on that urge? And so then all of our actions are then going to have outcomes. And so we have short-term and long-term. Short-term might be minutes, hours, the rest of that day. Long-term could be the next week, the next month, that kind of thing. And so, I come home and my spouse isn't taking out the trash, and I'm thinking, you're an idiot and you don't care, and really I'm sad because I just feel like you disrespected me, and it's just like, core in there, my action might be to snap because my secondary emotion is anger, and so now I'm saying that you're an idiot, and then I slam the door and I walk out of the room. So there's going to be outcomes, in the short term. Probably continuous behavior because I'm acting in a mood congruent way by slamming the door with my anger and saying mean things. Long term, it's going to be like, okay, maybe when I get home, my spouse is going to be on edge because they don't know, like, I took out the trash today, are they going to be mad? Or, oh no, I didn't take out the trash today. The last time this happened, they got mad. So there are going to be those outcomes. Going back to the vulnerabilities part, would the trash not being taken out be that big of a deal if I had a full night's sleep and I ate all my meals and I didn't overindulge in caffeine and sugar and my boss told me I had a great day, or like I did a great day at work? Probably not. But if I'm more vulnerable because I'm sick, the baby was crying all night, I didn't get breakfast and I didn't have coffee, and then my boss was like, hey, you're really slacking at work, trash not being taken out is going to be more of a prompting event. And so it helps you go, how did I get here? Why am I so upset? I don't know how this happened. We're going to track all of these things. So the vulnerability portion is where we can throw in some self-care. And the action urge and the action is where we can actually put in DBT skills. And so instead of slamming the door and calling myself an idiot, I could use a distress tolerance skill and do some paced breathing and calm myself down to say, hey, I really would have liked for you to take the trash out because I asked you to do it this morning before we both left for work. So it's taking the time to respond instead of react, which in effect is going to change our long-term and short-term outcomes. So the teens and the preteens do this. They track every single day. So this is an active tool that you can use with your clients and have them, like, if you trust them, take it home, fill it out every day, and then bring it back to session. And that would be contingency management for them to bring it back every time. So, thoughts on that?
It just really helps break it down
Yes.
for the
It's like
patient.
step by step. And then you're like, especially with teens, like, I'm mad, and so I threw my phone across the room and said something stupid to my parents. Well,
It happens so quickly.
Yeah. What was the outcome? One,
In my head, yeah.
do you like being grounded? No. Okay. What could we have done?
Add in some Glasser reality therapy.
Yep.
DBT is the whore of therapy. There's another Jimbo.
Trollop.
What?
Trollop.
Yeah, but exactly, it breaks it down, helps them understand it.
Yeah. So yeah, especially if you have a client who's like, woo, and they just go really quickly, and they're like, I don't know what happened. I don't know how I got here. It's like, oh, I didn't sleep well, and then I ate, and then I got a fight with my dad. It's so weird that I got mad so quickly, and you're like, that makes sense. And here's why. So yeah, so that's too where then that self-awareness piece can come in. To be like, oh, when I'm tired and I'm hungry, usually this happens, and I can track it, and I have behaviors to like go back on. And yeah, it's a good way for them to monitor too. And so this is like the fancy pretty one. The one that we do is like in session with parents and clients or teens is this guy. So it's the same thing. Again, there's copies of this in the drive, so y'all can all have too. So I'm gonna move through this though, since y'all can have access to that. And also here's the diary card. But this is the teen. The preteen looks a little bit differently than this, just based on where they are developmentally, but it's the same idea.
So do most clients or kids like this too?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it can be easy for them to just like go through it and do it, but we can look back and be like, hey, look at your sheet and you said you've decreased substance use. That's awesome. What skills have you been continually using? And let's show like that worked. And so now they have a way to track it.
So they like seeing that.
Yes and no. I think with an older client who can take it home, it's like, oh wow, this is in my face. like I can show you that I'm decreasing these things based on what I'm reporting, the skills I'm actively using, that you can go, this works. So. It's about perfect time actually. So we're going to get into states of mind, and then how we can use these states of mind, the wise mind skill, with our different populations. So I personally think that wise mind is the like crux skill in DBT because it's part of our mindfulness module. So that's part of being aware, observing what's going on, and doing it effectively. And so we have different states of mind. And so our states of mind, being reason and emotion, just are. They're not bad, they're not good, they just are what they are. And so there are times though it is good to be in one of those states of mind over the other in certain situations. And so, well, I'm going to ask you these rhetorical questions. But why do we have emotion mind in the first place? If y'all are here, y'all could shout it out. But I think it's easy, especially when we're working with emotional clients, for them to feel that emotions are bad and get them in trouble. And it's like a shaming thing. But emotions help us connect with people and have relationships, and emotions are survival responses. Like when we feel fear, it's telling us we are in danger and we have to move. And so emotions tell us what's going on. They serve a purpose. They're not there just willy-nilly. So it's empathy, and they are really what cause us to react and to respond. If you're going the psychodynamic route, like extreme emotion might be like your id subconscious. So just throw that in there. But there's some cons or unpleasant things about being emotion minded, and that would be you're impulsive and you maybe be really hot and cold with people, or you're gonna see a lot of emotion minded people struggling with SIB, maybe like if eating disorder or bulimia. They're gonna be more past oriented. We focus on that a lot, and yeah, I think that's it. But like, if you're seeing that symptomology, probably more an emotion minded person. Flipping that, why do we have reason mind? Or what is good about reason mind? Reason mind is logical and thoughtful, and it's planned out, and problem solving, and makes a good leader, these things that are really great qualities. But when we're too much in reason mind, we can be really rigid and cold, struggle with flexibility, might not be awesome with relationships. And this, like the more clinical realm, a lot of anxiety is going to come from that. Oh, that's one thing. Sorry. Think of emotion mind, depression. Reason mind is going to be anxiety. Like maybe some OCD factors. And we're going to be future oriented. Anorexia, if you're dealing in the eating disorder world, probably be in this realm more than the emotion mind. And so future oriented, anxiety, rigid, like these kind of things. In psychodynamic world, extreme reason, this might be our super ego. So you might consider that like, your governor, you're taking charge, the dictator, that kind of thing. A lot of times too, I'm throwing this in with like Jimmy's ODD stuff, I think if you're reason minded, you might be the dictator or the authoritarian parent. And if you're emotion minded, you might be the friend or the lenient parent. So connecting those two. So putting these together is wise mind. It is operating out of emotion and reason, which would be going back to that dialogue of acceptance and change. These two things where I can be emotional and I can make thoughtful, rational decisions at the same time. The hope is that I would make these decisions thoughtfully and with my emotions still in play. And so I like to think of wise mind also as like a state of mind. as opposed to like an actual skill. But am I being wise-minded in thinking of these other skills that I can use right now? Am I thinking, hey, I'm really, really angry right now and I want to self-harm? Or I'm really angry and upset right now and I want to self-harm and I'm going to use a skill. Like, that's wise mind, is going, I have emotion and then I'm putting reason together.
Is it, it is a gross oversimplification, but potentially somewhat accurate to maybe say females, generally speaking, are more emotion minded than males reason minded.
Yeah, I'll do that. And parent group, I'm like, great, what? I'm going to go with stereotypes. I'm going to say one of you might be more reason minded, one of you might be more emotion, and they're like, like, yeah, and that's okay. But it also helps me go, okay, what do you think your child is? Oh, emotion minded. Oh, okay, so that's why you two make sense a lot and like agree on the same thing. This is where you guys have conflict. Yeah. Because most of the time they're like, yeah. And you could potentially compare that to Myers-Briggs, like thinking, feeling.
Totally.
Yeah, I'll do that. And they're like, good. Nope, I won't say that. I'm on camera. So, that's wise mind. I like to think of it as like an overarching cloud theory to where I can then utilize all these skills. Really, maybe not just stress tolerance because you're probably just emotion mind at that point, but the rest of these skills, if you can be in wise mind, then I can start to use these other skills. So, rhetorical question. But think about some of the benefits of putting emotion and reason together and to create wise mind. Okay. Oh, title slide. Okay. So families, how could we use wise mind with a family? We kind of do this in our IOP groups, but we talk about reacting versus responding. And so reaction is most likely going to be within emotion mind, and a response is going to be that wise mind statement. It's going to be, I'm taking time to compose myself, collect, I'm really upset, and I'm going to choose to respond in this way. So having your families go, what happens when we're all reacting instead of responding? And we're more likely to react when we have stressors and change and transition, you know, all these things that probably keep our baseline pretty high and pretty elevated. So remembering that reactions are not mindful, but responses are mindful. So reminding them of reaction, if we're purely in emotion mind and everyone is in emotion mind, we're going to probably create more chaos than we are going to dissolve the crisis. And so something that would be is just having that self-awareness piece of who in your family is more emotion minded and who is reason minded. Just that element of awareness and understanding like, oh, this is how I function is already a helpful piece. In groups, we do wise mind plans of action, and how as a family
number of minutes
as a family, how do we respond and not react? And so if there's topics or people or events that maybe we don't touch or we don't like talking about, how do we, or they cause a lot of emotional volatility, how do we have a wise mind plan of action to be able to respond and not react? And so we have those statements, if you guys want, within our Google Drive to aid in this type of conversation. So I think knowing what is a family you do and how can we respond and not react.
which makes Monday night so powerful.
And like a response might be, if I'm emotional, I will use myself. I'm emotional, and so I probably, like when I get worked up, want to deal with the conflict right now. And for me, a response would be, I need to use my reason mind, take a 5-minute break, collect myself, and then come back. If I'm more reason minded, I might isolate and be like, I'm done. So I need to come back and actually engage in the conversation, which would be a response, as opposed to my I'm shutting down and reacting. And so, yeah. Oh, here it is. So this is what these are what the teens have. So
Those are the wise mind statements.
yeah.
So again, we're going to put, I'm going to email you guys with the link to this presentation and also include Molly's presentation because I know you can't see it on the video. And I'm going to email a diary card and wise mind statements.
And with these, we have like the teen fill one out, and then the parents fill one out. So then the parent says, your child just broke up. No, your child is like upset because their friend is dating their best friend. You know, like it's from the parent's point of view. So then we're coming together, and your kid is upset. You're maybe upset. How do we come at the same topic as a family? So, because we have different perspectives based on our role. Okay. For couples. I think it can be similar to like the pursuer withdrawer idea, because that in itself is dialectic. One of us is pursuing, one of us is withdrawing. And what state of mind are you in when you're
This is
pursuing?
Susan Johnson.
Mm-hmm. What state of mind are you in? Are you in reason mind when you're pursuing? Probably in emotion mind. If you're withdrawing, you're probably in reason mind. Just acknowledging who is what. Who is more reason minded? Who is more emotion minded? So what does it look like to interact with each other through our wise mind? And doing some like role play of like being the other person. So if my spouse is really reason minded, what does it look like for me to interact with them in a reason minded way, and like flipping the roles? I know there are ways to do that in other therapies, but how does wise mind play a role in conflict resolution and communication, and like doing this in session and utilizing your wise mind? I did see Paul, shout out to Paul, has wise mind with couples or wise mind in marriage in the drive, and so I'm giving you the authority to take it. Sorry, Paul, but he's already doing this, and so you have like, if you need a worksheet or you need something that's pretty tangible, Paul has one. I don't know, I just thought about this one, but like, what state of mind are you in when you're in like Four Horsemen? And so just keeping those things in mind. Yeah, so how could you use the states of mind and role reversals? Being the other person, coming about it from their point of view in the way that they would respond challenges your natural inclination as well. And then, lastly, we'll do kids. So how could you use wise mind with kids? And the kids version is called full mind as opposed to wise mind. So
You talking kids like preteens?
Preteens and like upper elementary.
Okay.
So fact mind is reason mind, and feeling mind is emotion mind. So wise mind with the little ones is full mind. Another way you can put it is, what does your head say, and what does your heart say? So what are those two things together? And I think that's where you can get with some of the younger ones. Like what's up here say? So what would your head and your heart say together, which they would consider full mind? And with the kids, we can do an activity, and it just might be more fun for them, but you get to create your full mind jar. And so when you create your own full mind jar, we're gonna have like beads and rocks, maybe not rocks with kids, I don't know, beads as facts, and sand as our feelings. So what happens if my jar is only full of beads or rocks? There's like no room for sand, or there's little room for sand. But if I only have sand in my jar, there's no room for beads or rocks in this jar. And so putting some beads and some rocks in this jar and then having the sand fill in the gaps is going to be your full mind. So here's what it would look like physically, but also you can get a jar and do this with like sand or whatever you want, and get creative with it. But if you have a kid who maybe just wants to like write it down and write it out, you can do that. So lastly, resources. Parenting a teen who has intense emotions is $14. It's a book, obviously, for the parents. On Amazon. I think I have maybe all of these. Parenting a child who has intense emotions. This would be, again, for the younger ones, for the parent. And then Don't Let Your Emotions Run Your Life for Kids is actually a workbook, and a lot of where we get like these from. So like we created that sheet, but the concept is from this book. So it's like a workbook for maybe younger ones, and it goes through all of DBT for an active experience. So and they're like not super expensive.